Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey, everybody. All right. Well, we had a kind of an event last night. I don't know how many of you watched it, but the speech last night was one of the most unhinged things I've ever witnessed in the history of American democracy. And that's kind of saying something as someone who's been an activist and she was 15 years old. That was a wild, wild ride. Now, we're going to talk about the speech because he didn't do some things that I thought he was going to do. There were some predictions that he was going to declare war on Venezuela. There were some predictions that he was going to hang out what essentially would have been a bribe to the American people in the form of a payment to American families to offset the enormous costs that have resulted from his tariff plan. And he didn't do that. Instead, he spent 20 minutes screaming. Screaming. I'm not joking. It was like a very, very shouty shout kind of speech, screaming at the American public. All the networks carried it live for reasons I don't understand. And the end result of it was a perception of him just as someone who had completely lost it. Now, I know this is no shock to anybody in this audience, but I will tell you that a lot of people were wondering at the end of the speech why he had actually done it, because it didn't say anything new. It was, in fact, a sort of rehashing of blame, claiming the Democrats were the reason that the economy is so terrible, just lies upon lies upon lies. One of which we're going to talk about very shortly because it's very significant. But people were wondering, like, why the hell did he do this? There was no great news coming out of this. There was no apparent reason for it. And this morning we learned the reason why. So this morning in the Daily Beast, there was a breaking news story about what happened in the minutes after the speech ended. And apparently Trump was caught on a hot mic by White House reporters. This obviously wasn't happening live because on TV, because everybody had cut away from it, mentioning that Susie Wiles had forced him to do the speech. Okay, so just to sum up the last 72 hours, as you all know, 2 days ago, this story broke about Vanity Fair that Susie Wiles, who is, of course, Trump's White House chief of staff, had given 11 separate recorded interviews to Vanity Fair where she had essentially slammed in very specific terms every single person inside Trump's inner circle and Trump himself. What seems to be apparent based on this news that we got this morning is that Susie Wiles forced the president to do this speech. This is again a sign of how little he is in control of his faculties, as a means presumably of distracting from her own professional implosion. And the argument behind it was the American people need to hear from you about our agenda, right? And what it was instead was the equivalent of a nursing home memory care patient screaming at the walls about things that are literally not true. So, this is the whole reason why. For folks who were wondering the big why, that is it. Susie Wiles made him give this speech for reasons just that make absolutely no sense. Now, this morning, there is additional breaking news about one of the more significant lies that he told inside this speech. So if you watch the speech or you watch any of the coverage afterwards, you know that one of the things that Trump said was that he was going to give a $1,776 warrior bonus to everyone in the military. Well, shocker of shockers, it turns out that warrior bonus, quote unquote, is actually just a repurposed housing subsidy that has already been approved by Congress. So essentially what they are doing is taking money that was already supposed to go to the military and rebranding it as a warrior bonus when it's money that already would have been in their pockets. So there's no new money, in other words, coming to the U.S. military as a result of Trump's speech. And that in and of itself, by the way, I have to say, I'm watching some veterans that I know report on this, and the fallout of it on Blue Sky is so insulting. Like, I can't imagine being a military service person watching that speech, probably desperate, because by the way, a lot of our military don't make a lot of money, considering what it would be like to have an extra $1,776 in your pocket between now and like the first few months of the year. To then have the rug pulled out from under you and to learn that it's just your housing subsidy being branded as something else would make me very, very, very angry. And I expect that what we're going to see from our enlisteds and from military officers is, you know, that kind of outrage. We may not see it displayed in the mainstream media, but I will tell you, this is a huge, really despicable insult to our military service people. So quite, again, shocked, not shocked, as Kyra Style just said on Blue Sky. But truly a revolting turn of events coming out of his speech last night. Now, a number of our Patreon subscribers did ask some questions this morning about just how unhinged this speech was. And apparently Robert Reich has also, in elevated terms, for the lack of a better way of putting it, made some gestures this morning about the need to get Trump out of office. So I want to reiterate just a couple of things, because you all know I'm here to kind of like talk you off the ledge. First and foremost, because this was something that actually came up on the Patreon feed this morning. The president cannot launch a nuclear strike on his own, all right? Like, even if he's a complete madman, there are layers and layers of protocols in place to prevent him from launching a nuclear strike, okay? And this is something that actually I feel like commentators have an obligation to inform the public about. It's not literally like he plugs in a set of nuclear codes and a bomb goes off. That's not how any of this works. Again, there are layers of required back checks inside our military. There are layers of responses that are required. And it's not as though he can just randomly fire off a nuclear weapon, all right? And again, I have to say this to the people who are in our chat saying the military aren't refusing orders. This is not about orders. That shows actually a very serious misunderstanding of the way in which nuclear launch codes work. This is not about them taking orders. There's actually huge protocols in place, like requirements to backcheck and backcheck again the necessity of a nuclear strike before a bomb can, or a missile can actually be launched. So again, this is a moment for people to take it down like 5 notches, all right? The president, crazy as he may be, cannot of his own volition launch a nuclear strike, all right? It's really important for people to understand that, because there's enough to worry about in the world right now without actually freaking out about something that is extremely unlikely to happen, okay? That said, there are renewed discussions this morning about things like the 25th Amendment and the ways in which the president can be removed from office. So I want to make something very clear to all of you. I have said this again within the last few weeks. I'm going to say it again here. If you have an understanding of how the 25th Amendment works, you understand that in this scenario, that route is impossible, okay? And I don't say that lightly, but I want everybody to be very, very clear about it. It is impossible, all right? And here's why. The 25th Amendment requires the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare to Congress that the president is unfit to serve, okay? J.D. Vance, just as much as everybody else, knows that he is not capable of holding together the MAGA coalition. And one of the other things that I just want people to grasp is that the cabinet is full of people who spend their cabinet meetings going around the table, worshiping the ground that Trump walks on. Okay. The idea that a majority of that cabinet, people like Pete Hegseth and Linda McMahon and Marco Rubio and RFK Jr. are going to vote to have him removed from office is a pipe dream. It will not happen. And so what that takes us to is impeachment. And again, I have to remind you all, this is one reason why what's coming in 2026 is so important. Okay. If you want this president removed from office by official means, meaning that like, there isn't a medical emergency that would automatically invoke the 25th Amendment because that's the only thing that can do it, right? And it's in very rare circumstances, like when Reagan was shot for a window of time, George H.W. Bush was actually the acting president. It's only in those kind of circumstances that we would see the 25th Amendment invoked unintentionally, okay? the only way that he is going to be removed from office is through the impeachment process. And so that is a reason why your electoral work in 2026 is going to be necessary. And that's like an understatement, right? Like we're all really going to have to hit it very, very hard. And I also want people to understand that if we take back the House and say we don't get the supermajority in the Senate that we would need to remove him, there are still going to be a lot of leverage points to push. Okay. And that means impeachment investigation can start. Impeachment investigations can start. There can be whole, hearings and testimony testimony taken under oath and referrals for criminal prosecution. Those are not likely to go anywhere because it's the DOJ under Pam Bondi. But nonetheless, the education of the American public and the force of the people's will have something to do with it. And I have to say that, again, I have to remind everybody, it was only, like a little over 4 weeks ago that there were people saying the Epstein Files Transparency Act would never pass the House, let alone the Senate. That it would never be brought to the floor of the Senate because John Thune said it wouldn't be, let alone that Trump would not sign it. And here we are in a place where like the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed literally 30 days ago tomorrow. And we're supposed to get the Epstein files by the end of the day. Tomorrow, Friday. Like that's supposed to be what's happening. So again, I really want people to kind of understand that none of us has any idea what's going to happen next, but we can put the pressure in place. And I also just have to say something to the people who are still harping on the idea of a nuclear strike. Pete Hegseth is not the final sign-off, okay? I don't trust him. I know many of you don't trust him. It is really important to understand how this works, okay? It is not, again, like people need to be assured about this, all right? He cannot order Pete Hegseth to launch a nuclear strike and have it happen. That is not how any of this works. So again, I really want people to be extremely thoughtful about whether or not you are inadvertently terrorizing people about things that they do not need to be presently afraid of, all right? Because by the way, when you terrorize people, you terrify them about like what could happen. You know what happens? People shut down. They can't actually communicate, right? They're not able to engage in positive discourse or for that matter, change-making work that is incredibly necessary right now to save and protect lives, okay? Don't scare people unnecessarily. Like that's my best advice to you on that front, all right? There's a lot to be worried about right now. That one is not one that we need to amplify, okay? All right, so one of the things about, again, 2026 that we need to be mindful of is that whole things can shift very rapidly if we win the election in 2026. And again, I've been saying this now for weeks, but there are additional cracks in MAGA showing every single day. We are seeing over and over again defiance of the president's will, refusal to cooperate with the things that he wants, the loss of candidates that he's endorsed at elections by enormous numbers. There was an election result, by the way, in Kentucky the day before yesterday in a district that Kamala won by 5%, where the Democratic candidate won 75% to 25%. Okay, there's a lot of reasons right now to be very hopeful about what's happening and to stay optimistic in the face of what's going down. All right. And I know it's hard when you've got a crazy president screaming at you for 20 minutes before bed to stay rational. And at the same time, I have to say that what this speech smacked of was utter desperation. Like I watched it. I was laying in bed. I really didn't want to watch it, but I watched it anyway. And what it smelled like was flop sweat, was like the panic of the worst poll numbers of any president at this point in a second term in history, a failing economy, skyrocketing unemployment rates, cost of living completely out of control, the failure of so many of his policies, and understanding that the vast majority of the country despises what he's doing on immigration. It was a speech of a desperate, cornered, crazy man. And that, by the way, should give you a lot of reason for hope. Okay. So critical right now. All right. To see this in the lens of where we're at. Okay. So related to this, somebody asked a question about whether or not once Trump's out of office, we can reinstate the things that are lost. Okay. So this is a much larger discussion that we will be having at some point in great depth. But here's what I want to say about this. I don't think reinstatement is what we should be aiming for, to be honest. Some things will need to be reinstated immediately, like US aid. Right? Where like literally like hundreds of thousands of people are dying because of what DOJ did to US aid. But other things, okay, like, particular types of institutions that rapidly crumbled under the hands of Trump and Doge need to be reinvented from the ground up. And we have to be committed to transformation, right? To building a better world that is more secure and defended from fascism, to committed to building institutions that are designed to withstand it, rather than just replacing what is lost. Okay. And so in this regard, like, people really need to start thinking big. They need to, like, you need to be a visionary in the way you think about what's coming. Because I'm going to tell you something right now. Like, I'm sitting in the place with this a lot over the last couple of weeks. The pendulum is starting to swing back. And this is like a once in a lifetime, if not a once in a century opportunity to think about how American democracy can be reinvented. Because that pendulum swift, from all the signs that we're seeing, including like electoral turnout and votes and the way in which people are responding to the things that Trump is actually doing right now, it is going to present an enormous chance, not just for this country to like rise from the ashes, but actually to fully live into what it was supposed to be, that it's never actually achieved. And so, I would love to see, for instance, like the Colorado Science Institution that he's currently decimating because he hates Jared Polis for not letting the woman who interfered with the election out of prison because he tried to pardon her for state crimes and he doesn't have that power. Sure, I would like to see that institution rebuilt, okay? But I'm thinking much, much bigger than that. And I think there's actually an obligation right now for people to actually do that, to start thinking about what you want, what you're willing to work for when this is all over. And hopefully we have people elected who actually give a shit about the future of this country, unlike Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. Like, hopefully we've got leaders who actually can share and execute on that vision. And that, by the way, has to be part of what we start working for in 2026. So really critical. Okay, this is like a moment to start really stepping fully in, because the end is nigh, just FYI. I know there are a lot of people out there who are like, we have 3 more years of this and it's going to get so much worse. And it might, okay? But also, all of it could turn on a dime. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or in January or between now and next November. We have no idea. And the opportunities, frankly, are endless. And so it's a good moment to kind of like, I just said this yesterday inside the Ripple Effect Institute. I know some of you guys are here, but it's really important for me to repeat it again. To hold in one hand the reality of what we are facing with clear eyes, right? Like, we're living under a fascist dictatorship, okay? Like, let's all be really clear about that. And an enormous amount of optimism and hope for what's coming and what's possible when we move toward the other side of this. And we have to start planning for all of that, like, now. Okay, because we can't actually get to that place unless we have the vision for what we're looking toward. Okay. All right. Healthcare. Lots of people asked me about the healthcare bill because there was some questions, confusion about what actually happened yesterday in the House. Okay, so when we came on the air yesterday, we were talking about the mutiny against Speaker Johnson, because 4 Republicans actually signed on to the discharge petition that had been fronted by Hakeem Jeffries to do a clean bill extending the ACA subsidies for 3 more years. There was also yesterday a healthcare bill passed in the House that was different, okay? And that healthcare bill extends healthcare in weird sorts of ways and does not extend the ACA subsidies. Like, the details of it kind of don't matter because they're like throwaway, okay? So the subsidies have not passed. And on top of it, even if we get a clean vote in the House on the subsidies issue on the basis of the discharge petition, which we may not, because Johnson's about to shut down the House again, whether or not it would make it to the floor of the Senate is highly doubtful. So we now have a roadmap set up, because if the House goes out of session, they're not coming back until January, where the ACA subsidies are in fact likely to expire. Unless there is a vote today, it's pretty much over. And so that is a real drag and, incredibly not ideal. And also a sign of the fact that Mike Johnson is still, even with the defiance of his own party, hell-bent on carrying forward Trump's agenda and hurting the American people. All right. Mentioned this. Oh, actually, while we're on the House, let's talk about this horror show. There is some very, very, very bad news out of the House as of yesterday evening, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to verbalize it without expressing how much rage it induces in me. Yesterday, the House passed a bill with 3 Democrats signing on that bans all gender affirming care from puberty blockers to surgery for trans and non-binary children in the United States. If it passes the Senate, it will be signed by Donald Trump. And that, by the way, will mean exponentially greater death rates for trans and non-binary kids. Why? Because there is an enormous amount of data now. You can go check out the Trevor Project if you're curious about this, that in essence reports that suicidality rates skyrocket when trans and non-binary children do not get access to gender affirming care. I am enraged by this. And on top of it, there is some reporting this morning that RFK Jr., the CDC, and the FDA are about to introduce a whole new policy platform that will entirely restrict access to the medications that are used for gender affirming care for trans and non-binary kids. It's unspeakable to me what this country is doing to trans children. And, I have to say that this is the kind of thing, I know people who have already fled the United States because their kids are trans or have arranged for their children to leave the country because their kids are trans. This is something that is going to put a lot of people in a very dangerous and desperate situation with regard to their kids. I don't know what to say about it other than the fact that I said something on Blue Sky about it last night, and I'm just going to repeat it here. There will come a moment where this nation will look back on what it has done to these children with an immense amount of shame and disgust. Because targeting children, targeting kids who simply want to be themselves with policies and legal conduct, legal requirements that are going to cause them to die and suffer is about as amoral as you can get. And so I don't really know what to say about that, because there's nothing about that is good news. The one thing I will say is it will be challenged in court immediately. And depending on which judge it pulls, it could get delayed or tied up in court. But we all know what will happen when and if it gets to SCOTUS. So it's so foul. Like, it's so beyond foul. I kind of don't even know really how to react to it. And by the way, just for everybody who might think there's a redemption tour going on, the first and major sponsor of that bill is Marjorie Taylor Greene. So, yeah. Not a good moment, let alone for those of us who are parents of trans and non-binary kids. All right. Okay. Mentioned this earlier. Tomorrow is the deadline for the Epstein files. They are supposed to be released by the end of business tomorrow. We are going to get a front row seat to whatever kinds of excuses Bondi seeks to drum up to not release all of the files. Okay. And as I mentioned, I did a broadcast. I'm going to link it here again above when I'm done. For those of you who are not aware of all the reasons why they're not going to be able to apply like a broad investigation privilege to the materials that are in the Epstein files. There are 300 pages of documents in the files. We know that. We know that 11,000 of them are photographs and videos that have been classified as child sexual abuse material. Those will not be released because the Epstein Files Transparency Act allows those to be redacted. All right. But for everything else, literally everything else, they are required to document, not tomorrow, but within 15 days, the description of what they're withholding by document and the legal justification for every single redaction. All right. So one way or another, we're going to know what's in those files. And if they don't comply, as Robert Garcia and others have pointed out, Thomas Massey said this on the steps of the Capitol last week, they will be committing a criminal violation. Okay. And questions about who would prosecute that, given that it's Pam Bondi's DOJ, but it's a crime. And the statute of limitations will extend beyond Trump's term. So we're really going to have to see exactly what they release, but I'm just going to point something else out here. Okay. And I want to make this really clear for the folks who are, again, being very pessimistic in the comments. They do not see these files the way that we do, all right? And that's actually an advantage, all right? There will be things in those files that they don't think are damning, right? That we will see and be like, oh my God, okay? And some of this is going to concern the conduct of all of these incredibly wealthy, powerful men who associated themselves with Epstein. They are not allowed to redact these files on the basis of harm to anyone's reputation, by the way. So again, I want people to be very thoughtful. One more time, I'm going to shout this out about putting pessimism out into the world right now on this stuff. Because again, nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And we don't know what's going to be in the files that they choose to release. And if they don't release them, they're committing crimes. Okay. And we're supposed to get an index within 15 days of exactly what it is that they're redacting and why, with a line by line legal justification for the redaction. So this is a moment, again, where people should pause before doing the thing of like, I don't think we're going to get anything. All right. Again, you can go back and watch the video that I did that goes through the totality of what is in the Epstein Files Transparency Act so that you can understand exactly how rigorous it actually is. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. Okay. I'm not suggesting that we're going to get all of it because I know we're not going to get all of it because they're allowed to redact, for instance, the identities of the girls. They're allowed to redact, child sexual abuse material. Thank God. Like none of us want to see that, and no victim deserves that violation. But we're going to get something, and we'll see what it is. All right. So that's happening tomorrow as well. All right. I mentioned yesterday that Jack Smith was testifying on the Hill yesterday in a closed door hearing before House Judiciary. And we did get some news out of that yesterday, actually, which was really interesting. It was to the effect that Jack Smith was the person who made the final decision to indict Donald Trump, but very clearly established that beyond a reasonable doubt, he had committed crimes related to the 2020 election. And that what resulted in the indictments was Trump's own behavior. Okay. In any other environment, when we weren't having a crazy speech and potential war with Venezuela and dropping Epstein files and everything else, this would be a front page story for days. But right now, the most important part of this is that it seems as though this testimony, which was designed to kind of like shatter the Jack Smith investigation into pieces and potentially make him a target for prosecution, actually has backfired, much as predicted. All right. Because what we're actually looking at is truthful testimony about the details, which we don't know yet. I'm waiting for this to be leaked, of what was actually uncovered as a part of Jack Smith's investigation with regard to the president's crimes. A lot of that is already in the public domain. We've heard the call with Raffensperger in Georgia, right? We know that, the fraudulent elector scheme was coordinated right out of the White House. We know that January 6th was organized in a White House meeting in December of 2020 by Rudy Giuliani and others with the president. Okay. All of this is known, and Jack Smith uncovered things that we don't know yet. And we're waiting to see what those might be. So that was also some huge news yesterday. All right. Meanwhile, in Milwaukee, some of you may remember that a judge by the name of Judge Dugan was indicted by the DOJ for allegedly interfering with ICE arrests in her courthouse. And this arises out of her showing a person who was there for a hearing out a side door instead of into the hallway. And he was eventually detained anyway. All right. So she's on trial right now. And the trial's been going on for about 3 days. The defense just rested 15 minutes before I came on the air. And the prosecution, not surprisingly, has completely fallen apart. The prosecution's own witness yesterday testified that the judge essentially had walked through a gauntlet with this person of ICE officers and had not actually intentionally diverted this person anywhere so they could evade being arrested. That's their whole case. Their own witness shattered their whole case. This is not, by the way, the first time this has happened in a malicious prosecution. We've seen it already also in the Jim Comey indictment that was kicked out of court. So Judge Dugan has now, as of this morning, filed a motion for acquittal. And the judge will be hearing it, maybe hearing it right now on the bench. But in the meantime, the defense put on their defense case today. And Judge Dugan had a swath of judges who were also on the bench testifying about the fact that ICE had been literally snatching people out of the galleys of that courtroom, their courtrooms, putting them in shackles in front of other witnesses, detaining them when they were there awaiting immigration proceedings, and that there had been numerous conversations amongst all the judges in the courthouse about the fact that ICE was actually interfering with judicial duties. On top of it, her closing witness is the former mayor of Milwaukee, who has known her since she was 11 years old, testifying about the nature of her character and how honest she is and straightforward and how she would never do anything deceptive. So, I don't think this case is going anywhere, but I'm going to tell you something right now. If she is acquitted by the judge or by a jury, just know this, okay? It will be an incredible blow to the Trump administration, because essentially this was the first attempted prosecution of a judge for doing something to maintain order in their own courtroom related to ICE. And if it fails, it will be a huge blow to ICE's efforts in courtrooms, first and foremost, because it will give permission to other judges to use similar things. But second of all, it will be a huge blow to Stephen Miller, because this is his agenda. And so hopefully, probably by the end of the day today, because now the defense is rested, we're going to know what's going to happen with Judge Dugan. And I got to tell you, I think it's going to be a massive positive outcome in our favor and against the administration, but we will see. Okay, final thing, Venezuela. Bunch of questions today on the Patreon feed about Venezuela and the history of Venezuela and whether or not Stephen Miller's claims, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that somehow Venezuela has stolen U.S. resources on their own land would justify an invasion or going to war with Venezuela. Okay, so for everybody who doesn't understand this, I just learned this morning, actually. There is an incredible, step-by-step breakdown in Al Jazeera this morning about the way in which Venezuela's history with oil has gone down, okay? And there is actually an international law that says that if you are a country, you have a sovereign right over the resources on your own land, okay? So that means that whatever has happened in the past, it's illegal for another country to invade you to seize your natural resources, all right? But on top of that, Stephen Miller's claim that somehow the U.S. was instrumental in building up Venezuela's oil supply and all this stuff is bullshit, okay? It's not true. And in fact, there have been agreements. Venezuela's oil supply was taken by the state at one point after there had been a lot of privatized exploitation of oil. The state of Venezuela, the country of Venezuela, now controls all of its own oil production, okay? And that has meant that they have had agreements with oil companies to take, oil off their hands, all right? But even the oil companies that actually had drilling operations in Venezuela before it became state-owned have said, very critically in the last few days, that they have no interest in going back into Venezuela and doing private oil production inside Venezuela. So all of this is for nothing. That's the other thing that I just want people to understand. Not only is it wildly illegal, a huge violation of international law, if the U.S. goes into Venezuela, this blockade is illegal, right? All of this stuff that is essentially poking Maduro to wait for him to take some action that can then justify a war, all of it is illegal. But also the historical basis that Stephen Miller is vomiting out onto social media is totally false. And they don't have any legitimate basis for doing it, which also adds a whole other layer of wag the dog. Now, I want to reiterate one thing I said yesterday, because I think it's really important to remember this, okay? The whole reason that those 200 odd men were sent to El Salvador, were sent to CICOT, was on a claim that they were members of a Venezuelan gang. Everybody remember this? Tren de Agua? Can never pronounce it right. This whole thing is also a basis under which Stephen Miller, he did this explicitly yesterday, is claiming that we have been invaded, okay? And so part of what they're trying to do here is engineer a war that will then allow them to deport any one Venezuelan inside the United States, and probably a lot more of the Latino population who they will claim are Venezuelan, and therefore be able to execute on these mass deportation plans. All of this is a wag the dog scenario. So again, really important to understand this. That Al Jazeera article, I've actually posted it on my Blue Sky, is a really worthy rundown for people to read. But there is no legitimate legal basis. Let's just be 100% clear about it. No legitimate legal basis of any kind for the United States to go into Venezuela, let alone for oil. All right. So be educated about this in the way that you talk about it. Okay. All right. That is it for today. Please, if you like what I'm doing here, if you like this broadcast, this is not my day job. I am not a full-time YouTuber. What keeps this broadcast going actually is our subscriptions over on Patreon, because this broadcast every day takes time away from my actual day job, which is working with people who are building out huge social justice initiatives. If you like what you see here, please become a subscriber on Patreon. It helps me pay my tech team behind the scenes that help me run this broadcast. All right. You can head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive. We're running a promo between now and the 31st of December, where you can get an annual subscription for 20% off using the code FALL2025. You can ask questions. You get bonus broadcasts. We're having a bonus show tomorrow afternoon for all our Patreon subscribers. Please head on over there and support us. Like, it truly is the thing that keeps this show alive. And also, if you like what you see or hear here, give us a thumbs up. Please subscribe. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, please drop us a 5-star review. It means the world. And I will be back here tomorrow at regular time. Again, bonus broadcast tomorrow afternoon. We will have a special broadcast next Monday. We don't usually broadcast on Monday and Tuesday. And then we will be done for the rest of the week due to the Christmas holiday. So upcoming special broadcast on Monday. Wait, before I say that, I have to check my calendar. I'm saying it now and I'm not 100% sure. Maybe. It might be a little earlier or a little later. In any event, I will be around on Monday and we will go from there. All right. Lots of love to all of you. I'll see you back here tomorrow, and stay safe, everybody. Okay, bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.